At the heart of horror, there has always been more than spooks and scares.
Sometimes it's not what you see, but what you hear.
Welcome to Sound Scary.
Each week, we talk to the artists,
The musicians,
the fans, the people who haunt the shadowy corners of your mind.
join us as we delve into the deepest
Darkest,
and most unforgettable earscapes.
welcome
To Sound Scary.
James Oster here with Sound Scary. Unfortunately, Ryan Coltrera cannot be with us, but I'm really stoked to talk to one of my favorite people today, an amazing writer, Simon Barrett. You know who you are, Simon. Welcome to the show, man. Welcome to
It's true. I require no introduction for myself to myself, but other than that, I might require an introduction. Thank you for having me. This is great.
Well, first of all, I want to share with you because I watched Seance last week and I wasn't sure what to expect. I grew up on slasher films and on movies like, you know, Black Christmas, House and Sorority Row. Oh my God! I was so happy with what you've created here, dude.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Jesus.
That's wonderful to hear, especially in reference to Black Christmas and House on Sorority Row. I haven't cited Black Christmas as an inspiration, probably because it's fairly obvious. But it's also because it feels like citing The Godfather as inspiration. It's such a great film that it's almost like I don't want to hear someone took that as inspiration. You know, it's like my inspiration for this movie was, the greatest kind of seminal slasher film ever. Well, yeah, obviously that's the inspiration for every slasher film. So I haven't really talked about, Bob Clark's Black Christmas. Obviously we're referencing the kind of 70s version here.
We're not talking about the remakes? What?
I'm certainly happy to do so. But I mean, the fact that it has been remade twice and people are still kind of figuring out, how to kind of crack the code of what that first movie did, is interesting. But yeah, that, obviously that's a film. I think that Black Christmas has inspired a lot of movies in terms of kind of this horror setup, obviously, but I think people don't give that movie credit enough for its performances and approach to character. And also, I mean, that's if we're going to talk politics in horror cinema, I mean, that's a movie where the main conflict is the protagonist is getting an abortion against her controlling kind of ex-boyfriend's wishes. And can you imagine that in a modern studio release?
Not
we talk
close.
about how our culture's kind of swung to the left, but hard to imagine any studio wanting to do that in America, to the point where, the recent Black Christmas kind of did not do that. They chose kind of a different topic to make it kind of a women's rights film. And so, which is interesting. I just find that that's kind of always a fascinating indicator of where our culture is at. So that movie just does some really interesting things that you can watch it hundreds of times and still kind of unpack it, because it is the Rosetta Stone for all modern slasher language. It is the bridge between gialli and slashers, almost more than even House on Sorority Row or some other films that are more directly kind of doing the combination of giallo slasher thing. But Black Christmas just feels like they just did it almost unconsciously. They're just here's the perfect thriller. So you can't imitate that. In other words, you almost can't be influenced by Black Christmas because it's almost too good. It's almost like you have to look at what was Valentine doing, 25 years later. And that's kind of interesting to unpack.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, and I'm gonna give you a lot of credit with this because I do think it deserves credit. Is that a lot of times as a horror viewer, I see, you brought up Valentine. the David Boreanaz film. I'm not a huge fan of that film.
That's a big reasons. Well, that's a big mistake, but okay.
Well, here's the thing: I didn't love the characters. I didn't like.
No. That's a fair criticism.
And with Black Christmas, the original, you had characters that aren't always likable. They're kind of assholes, to be honest. Like
a couple of them are. The Margot Kidder character is, but you love her. She's so entertaining, and you understand why she's kind of a mess too. It's like she is a person. You understand that she's a character who's going to have a hard time in society, because the kind of like oppression that she's dealing with is at odds with the force of her personality, and I find that inherently so compelling when you see someone who you just see that they're just kind of screwed, but they shouldn't be, and that's kind of how they got a chip on their shoulder and defensive walls up. Certainly Seance deals with that with a couple of its characters, although that's not the movie's primary focus. But it's there if you're looking for it, and I think everyone can relate to that. Everyone can relate to having like negative experiences that create I guess this is literally why people go into therapy, is everyone can relate to having a negative experience that creates an unhealthy pattern and perhaps disproportionately defensive responses that prevent them from being open to future happiness. Sure, pretty much every human being can relate to what I just described. So it's very compelling, I think, when you hint at that being kind of the backstory for why a character is behaving the way that they are. And you can credibly do that. I think what I just described sounds kind of manipulative when I phrase it like that, but it's not, it's not like I'm sitting here being like, how do I make people care about this character? Oh, maybe if they had a tortured past and also they'll save a dog from a burning building on page 3. Anyone
was that scene cut out? Did you dog saving scene?
Man, we couldn't afford a fucking dog. No. But I mean, I haven't even read any of those screenwriting books, and all it takes is a glance at my work to confirm that is clearly the case. I probably should. I've just been very busy. I never read really like a how to write a script book. Like I just think like the characters kind of are who they are, and there's a certain character that I find personally compelling. And it's always kind of gratifying when people agree, and that's just my process. But Black Christmas, it feels like they're in the same wavelength. It's like it was just made by smart people for good reasons, and then they cast incredible actors. And obviously, a lot of it just comes down to casting because you can kind of write characters that are like in Seance on the page, but if you don't find the right people who get that sense of humor, it's not going to come across. So that's another thing with Valentine versus maybe Black Christmas is just different times, different audiences, and resulting in a different casting experience.
Well, I think for Seance, for me as a viewer watching it, I'm watching these characters and I'm seeing kind of the negative, there's like that kind of manipulative, there's kind of jerky characters, but each one I kind of gave a shit about. And that's honestly, that's rare because that was, like I said, with Valentine, that was my issue. I'm like, I don't necessarily care if this person dies. I'm kind of rooting for it, actually. Even the characters in this, because the way you layer it, because the way you present Suki's character, for example, she's not, and I think this is something you do as a writer consistently. You take these characters that we're not really sure of where they're coming from, why they're coming from. This is obvious, The Guest, obviously with Your Next. Do you think about that? Do you think, well, how do I kind of shock the audience or surprise the audience? Because I think you do this really well.
There's a lot of kind of ideas in that question that I do want to address, because I think, first of all, just as a film fan, the thing I enjoy most is like being surprised, but you can also just surprise people by not giving them what they want. You have to give people what they thought they were going to get, but then exceed their expectations, which I think a lot of genre filmmakers, don't really set themselves that goal because meeting the expectations is often kind of hard enough. And exceeding them, it feels like you're better off just pivoting to something different. But like, I think Adam and I have definitely found out that if you kind of don't give people what they were expecting, they're annoyed. But if you do and do something on top of that, like sometimes people can be quite passionate about how much they enjoyed, that viewing experience. And I understand that because that's what I love. I love sitting there watching a film that I'm engaged with, like, mentally, and I have no idea where it's heading, you know. And the films that can do that for me, like, that's how I felt like watching, like, you know, Hereditary. You know, I was just like, whoa, okay, like where am I going here? And so I'm instantly in my filmmaker brain, my brain that was previously just wondering how the fuck Ari Aster got that budget, that cast, turns off, and my viewer brain turns on, and I'm just like worried about the characters, and I want to know where they're headed. And, you know, and that's, so to me, that you have to surprise people sometimes just to get them engaged in the right way in the story. So they stop thinking ahead of it and they start just enjoying it. And I think pacing is part of that too. Seances, I think my first cut of Seance was like 106 minutes, and I got it down to 96 or so before I showed it to anyone. And then ultimately I was able to get it down to 88 without credits. And that was pretty much exactly where I wanted it. You know, I knew that I had a lot of scenes that I liked, but I also knew that the film needed to move fast to be the correct experience. So even though I was cutting things that I thought were good, cutting out those things that I liked was making the overall experience of the film more correct. You know, like, people weren't able to second guess the movie as much because it's just entertaining you. It's the next thing where you don't really wonder where AJ Bowen's character went for the whole movie because you just don't think about it. If you do stop to think about it, it's pretty obvious that we're setting something up there. We just had our main character leave the movie basically and gave you a different main character, kind of. You know, you're not, I mean, I think you always know Sharni's the main character, especially if you're, you know, especially the marketing and such. But, you know, the way the script was is kind of, you didn't know at first which one of them was going to be the lead, and then she turns out to definitely be the lead, and then he turns out to be something else. So I do love that, and I do think I do probably have something to say about, like, humanity and empathy somewhere in there. But largely, I don't want to get into anything too pretentious or philosophical, because I think what I'm responding to on just the most basic level is that I think conversations about, like, cinematic morality right now are in a very basic place, right?
You think?
We kind of have to tell ourselves that, like, movies are morally good, so we can feel morally good about just enjoying the most basic garbage, which is something that's fairly recent in cinema's development. I suspect it's about a 10-year fad. That's just how these things tend to go. Which, by the way, I'm not necessarily even disparaging that. I think a lot of great cinema has actually come out of that kind of impulse to create more kind of culturally important works, you know, especially with streaming services willing to pay for movies that people don't actually really want to see. That's leading to some great art. Like, and that's actually, like, those are kind of movies for me. You know, when there's an Oscars list of movies that, like, all collectively made about 5 million, that's usually when I'm kind of most like, well, this is what the Oscars should be for. You know, like is for these films that no one would otherwise really necessarily choose to engage with, as opposed to, you know, like the Marvel movies that have already made, you know, $250 million. So, I mean, I enjoy those films too. So, you know, I'm not like a cynical guy about this stuff, but I do think when we talk about character likability, we tend to talk about it in terms of, like, real world likability. And what tends to leave the conversation, that I think definitely can be in the conversation when it comes to horror movies and slashers, is just whether or not characters are annoying, whether or not the viewers like them on a wanting to spend time with them level. And that's what I think a lot of these movies get wrong, especially slasher films that are kind of just setting up. You were saying, you're saying that you don't like the characters of Valentine. I like a couple of them, okay, but it's a valid critique. And I think, like, so when you're dealing with a film that its approach to character is essentially kind of cannon fodder for the slasher killer, what those movies get wrong more often than not is they, like, know that characters should have, like, conflict and dynamics. They have, like, a vague notion that ramps up the drama and makes things more entertaining. But their solution to that is just to have everyone have these, like, petty grievances with each other and just be bickering constantly. Because that fills the basic, you know, it looks like that box has been checked. But all that's really doing is making you spend time with people that, like, if you were in a room with them, you'd leave. Like, you know, you just don't want to, you don't, like, these people aren't fun. They're annoying. And it's a very personal sensibility, like, how to create an unlikable character, unlikable in terms of their actions, and perhaps even, like, personal morality, like the Dan Stevens character in The Guest certainly has a very complicated moral code, some of which is related to, like, literal, you know, neurological conditioning that he's underwent.
What? Suspending him?
We could consider suspension.
No, you couldn't. I'll be interested to see what the board makes of you when this is in front of the entire country, not to mention our lawyers. Do you want to sue them?
I don't,
We're suing you and the school board. for the damages.
And so you're dealing with a character whose motivations are, pretty complex to unpack, but he's still really enjoyable because he's doing fun things and he's entertaining you. So I wouldn't say his character is unlikable.
Oh God, no.
And that's, I think, where these things start to become more complicated is like, there needs to be a distinction between likable and unlikable and annoying and not annoying. Because what I try to do is I try to have characters that are not annoying. And within that, they can be fairly complex and interesting and have conflicts and likes and dislikes and be at odds with one another. But the most basic thing they have to be is not people that I dislike spending time with. And just on a most basic level, it's shocking how people get that wrong. And that's a complex thing, though. Like, why do I like, the characters in Margot at the wedding, but I don't really like the characters in The Squid and the Whale? I don't know. Like, Noah Baumbach hit me with one of those things, but he didn't hit me with one of the other. I thought those characters were annoying, and I thought those characters were compelling. Like, it's a personal thing. So obviously, like, when it comes to something like that, no one's going to say, like, well, The Squid and the Whale's a bad film because Simon Barrett didn't really understand why I'm supposed to care about anyone in it. Yeah. I think most people think it's a good film. Sure. And so, so a certain degree, personal sensibilities involved, but I also just think, like, when it comes to horror, people don't spend enough time kind of thinking about just that flat out thing of just like, why do I want to be around these people? So like, when it comes to casting, my casting hurdle with Seance was once I cast Suki Waterhouse as Camille, I I had this challenge where the dynamic of the film is supposed to be kind of her character being a bit downtrodden and isolated, and I was kind of like trying to figure out what that was supposed to be now that I'd cast this like incredibly striking, charismatic person as the lead. And then Anana Sarkis and Madisen Beaty kind of auditioned. I was like, oh, this is going to go just fine. They're both so entertaining in such a specific way, and I can see them kind of walking all over, maybe not Suki, who can take care of herself, but Camille, the character of Camille, when Suki's playing Camille, I could suddenly see this dynamic kind of working. So, but before I found Anana Sarkis for the Alice role for Seance, I was really struggling because almost everyone I was looking at for that role felt like they would have a hard time, going kind of like head to head with Suki. But then Anana, you meet Anana and she has such a different, fun approach. So that character really changed a lot. But I think for the better. So, you just kind of have to be open to that, I guess. But yeah, I guess I'm just very sensitive to being annoyed when I watch horror movies.
Well, I think it's true. But, we're talking a lot about the creating the characters and writing these characters. But my God, you directed the hell out of this film, dude.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it's a very beautiful film. The location is striking. These characters are fascinating. There's a lot. Why was this the one you wanted to do? The one that you wanted to put your name on as director?
Well, I'm going to stop you right there because I'm an even better director than you think, because we did not find a location for this movie. It's like 8 different locations that Kareem Hussein and Marlena Fihiri are finding ways with me to make it look like we filmed this on an actual school. Like the exterior is a total... all the interiors are different from the exterior of the school was just a house that I found driving around Winnipeg with Kareem. And then we called the real estate agent. We had our production coordinator called the real estate agent. They're like, yeah, it's empty. Yeah, but you can't film inside. So, so it's a bunch of different locations trying to make that thing look like a school.
It did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd always wanted to direct something, and I think I did have just like a lot of pent up ideas. And I think that's sometimes why, like, first time filmmakers, can sometimes really mess up. And fortunately, I had enough experience producing low budget films and working with Adam that we were able to come in, under budget, on schedule. I didn't do any of those things. But you also like do have this, like all these ideas in your head that you want to try, and some of them just like might not work, but some of them might. And then, so I do think like, I wanted to embrace that. Like I knew that our budget was low enough that like I had to be making like bold kind of visual decisions. And, fortunately, Kareem Hussein is not a DP who is like opposed to that. I think basically as soon as he found out that, with our situation, with our financing situation on Seance, the bad news was we didn't have any money. The good news is we could basically do whatever we wanted as long as we delivered a competent film that our financiers would be able to sell for a profit. That was really it. They were like, here's here's the bar you have to hit, and within that you can kind of do whatever you want. And because Hanway Films, who'd helped raise the financing for your next, and the guests were involved, and I think they had a bit of trust for me, especially Matt Baker there, who kind of came on to more directly produce this than he has other projects, and has told me that he's never doing that again. And I don't blame him one bit. It was it's not easy making low budget movies.
No, it is not.
But yeah, I mean, you can't complain about it. It's wonderful, but and I'm very lucky to be here. But it's a lot of work. It's intense. So but I was ready for that, of course, because writing and producing these things is to a certain extent no less difficult if you're very hands on. Which the early films that I did with Adam necessitated, and so. So I just knew kind of going into it that we had to make visual choices, otherwise the film would look potentially cheap, because we honestly just couldn't afford the ingredients that you would expect from a more mainstream film, from a Valentine or a Black Christmas. I didn't have as much money as any iteration of those films, and so I couldn't try to do just straight up what say Sophia tried to do with The Last Black Christmas, where you're just kind of following a certain visual guideline that you can afford to shoot that way. I had to try something different. So I did. So I talked to Kareem, and we found a bunch of cool old kind of repackaged lenses. And I talked to Marlena, and, we just tried to find any place in Winnipeg that looked old and had old wood, and it would fit this certain kind of visual aesthetic that I put together of what colors I wanted us to lean towards and what colors I wanted us to avoid, which also Leslie Kavanaugh, who did the costumes, she was on the same page with all that. And it was just really getting, all the department heads just on the same page with why this wasn't going to be just a low budget horror film. Because look, at the end of the day, when you're shooting, I knew Leslie and Kareem and Marlena were, pretty excited, but if you're crew on a film like Seance and you're working with a first-time feature director you probably haven't really heard of, because, unless you're randomly a fan of, American indie horror cinema, you don't really know why, you should care about Seance more than the 17 Hallmark movies you just made in Winnipeg for the exact same budget, right? And so, so I really did just want to make it clear. I was this is different. We're shooting this in a different way. We're shooting this with a different kind of lens. We're shooting this with a really shallow depth of field, just setting up all these rules for how we were going to film that largely just served to kind of let people know hey, I am going to try to make this, I know we have to get 73 setups in an hour, but I'm going to try to make them all look really, kind of dreamy and again, some of the films that inspired Seance are films that I don't even personally really love that much. I think What Have You Done? What Have You Done to Solange being kind of a good example of a film that I don't really like its plot or its characters, but I love the way it looks and I love the atmosphere and the feeling of that movie. And obviously with Kareem, there's some DPs out there who you might have to say I want this to look like What Have You Done to Solange, and they're I'll go rent that. And then there's Kareem where he's just which shot specifically? Because I can remember every single one, and I need to know what you're referring to. He's just oh wow. I mean, oh yeah. If you've never met Kareem, I mean, the reason I know Kareem is because we just met at film festivals hanging out.
Oh wow.
In fact, I have vivid memories of waiting in line with Kareem and Rob Cotterill, who produced Hobo with a Shotgun and is producing Brandon Cronenberg's Infinity Pool and stuff. And he came on to help us out as first AD on Seance. I remember waiting at 8 a.m. to see Dracula 3D, the Argento Dracula, and it was Kareem, Rob, and me in line at 8 a.m. and no one else, to see Dracula's 3D. And we all kind of knew each other. I knew Kareem had done Subconscious Cruelty because he's directed stuff. At the time, I think Theater Bizarre was just kind of vaguely in the works. We hadn't even talked. This was pre-VHS. I feel no, this might have been around that era. And anyway, we all kind of just stayed friends after sitting and watching Argento's Dracula 3D. It's just one of those things that you see it together and you kind of come out of it and you shared something.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Subconscious Cruelty. No one talks about that film, and wow, what an amazing movie.
Well, I mean, Kareem has a really pretty striking and kind of shocking body of work. I'm excited for when he becomes this legendary, Roger Deakins level DP, which the only thing, The only thing that would prevent Kareem from becoming an absolute legend is the fact that he, I think, loves making movies so much that I can't imagine him like ever really saying like no to a project that engaged him even slightly, because he just loves shooting and he has such like a creative, like he just loves being involved in the creation of films. And so like, you know, I just can't see him ever not working. But that works out for filmmakers like me, because if Kareem was smart, he'd look at a budget like Seance and say, like, no, there's no room for a DP to like make this look good. But instead, Kareem's like, okay, I'll help you out. Like, what have we got? Like, how are we going to do this? Okay, well, let's get rid of the B cam and let's get this instead. And, you know, we start breaking down the budget together and just like, okay, if I sacrifice this, I can have this. If I get rid of this, I can have this. And, you know, that's how I like to work, because Kareem's not just like a DP who like cares how the movie looks. He cares about whether you're going to make your days, like whether the movie's going to get finished, you know, like he really sees the big picture. So I just had a great team. You know, none of these people are people I'd ever worked with before. But, you know, I was on my own with this one. So it was, you know, it kind of felt like the theme was just to find a new team. And then I went off to do VHS 94 recently, and I had to hire a bunch of new people again, because in different province in Ontario, and Kareem was busy. And, yeah.
Well, you know, the thing is, too, I was watching it and realizing it's an indie, realizing it's probably a low budget. I didn't see it, dude. It looks
That's
gorgeous.
the trick. That's the trick. Well, look, I mean, we made Your Next for about $700,000, like all in. Yeah, I think people don't know that, because we didn't talk about that much at the time, because we wanted people to think it was a real movie. We wanted to trick them. So we wanted people to think it cost like, I don't know what we wanted people to think Your Next cost, maybe $2 million, but it cost about $700,000. And watching Adam and Andrew Palermo, AP, who's now shoots, just shot Green Knight for Dave Lowry. Like watching them like really work on Your Next was, I think, and I, you know, I was very involved in those conversations as well, because I was producing that film and I put it together in my hometown. And so we kind of had on Your Next this like mandate of like, we know we're making something cheap. We know we don't have a lot of time. We actually had way more time than I did on Seance, because Seance was a union thing, whereas Your Next was more of a run and gun in mid-Missouri thing. You know, but we had less money on Your Next. So we knew we were trying to make choices on that film, working with Tom Hammock, our production designer as well, that would make it feel basically like a real movie. You know, we knew that the hurdle with Your Next was just to make it feel like a movie that you wouldn't find incongruous to see on a big screen. Mm-hmm. And you know, and that's the challenge. And so with Seance, I kind of knew that was, again, that's it. It's like at a budget level this low, and, you know, I was between Your Next and The Guest on Seance. You know, I had, you know, a couple million, which is nothing to shake a stick at. No. And you know, it gives you enough resources to, like, you know, that fire in the fireplace in one scene cost me $3,000. I know exactly how much that cost, because we were sitting there, and my line producer Connie was like, you know, I bet we could get a fire in that fireplace if you really wanted one. I bet it would cost about $3,000, but we kind of saved that on parking yesterday, so I bet we could do it and not go over. I was like, yeah, let's get a fire in that fireplace. And like, you know, you just kind of, I was able to do, you know, Your Next week when I had a fire. Like, so, you know, it's little things like that add up. They give you a little bit of atmosphere. You know, and you always say yes when it's something that can like add that kind of a little bit more value or scope to a scene. You know, you try to make smart choices, but it's really just allocating your resources appropriately and just kind of understanding, you know, what, for example, Seance had 22 shooting days. Mm-hmm. I wanted more for our scenes with a lot of young actors talking to one another. I knew I had to do a lot of takes. So, you know, there were times because of that I wanted more time for the actors to work with one another, that then I'd get to, like, you know, okay, there's a big fight scene and now I only have 4 hours to shoot it. So, okay, so now we need to go maybe a little handheld for some of these shots. I was planning like Steadicam shots, but now maybe we do these handheld and try to shoot it like, you know, you just adapt in the moment. A lot of that is adapting in the moment, because, you know, you can never go back to a location again. I never reshot anything on Seance. We had no reshoots. I mean, we just didn't have them. Well, then COVID happened, so we didn't have any. So like, I didn't even reshoot a close up. I did not have the money and resources to reshoot a close up. But that's why you get all that stuff in principal photography. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get a close up. So like, whenever we weren't filming anything, you know, Kareem and Steve, our camera operator, you know, and I would just like run out and film a leaf or something. And just go, hey, now I've got that in case I ever want to cut to a shot of a leaf. Turns out I didn't, you know, but like, you know, it's one of those things. You're always trying to get yourself those ingredients, and little things like that, I think, hopefully what makes it feel, like a bigger budget film than it was. But I don't want to, because at the end of the day, if Seance is a success, probably like 99% of the people who see it will just have like no concept of its budget and no concept of what a budget like kind of even is for a film at that level. You just want them to enjoy the film. You want them to not have to think about it. You want to not distract them. So that's all you're really trying to do, because like this is a conversation for us, but like, the movie's not going to screen on like, iTunes or in theaters with a disclaimer from me talking about the budget and our shooting schedule. The movie's going to screen and no one's going to know who I am. And that's correct. That's who I want to see the movie. I want the same people to see Seance, like, the equivalent of us watching, Valentine or Black Christmas, Yeah. Like I didn't necessarily know who made those movies when I saw them. And, I kind of found out later when I became more interested in filmmaking on a constructive level. So I think like, that's something I think about a lot is like, if you're making a low budget movie, you're not going to have a chance to like make excuses for it. You really have to be like, you don't want to make the cheap version of something you can't afford. You need to make the best possible version of something you can afford, which means downscaling yourself kind of creatively. The good news is I wrote Seance. So whenever anyone was like, we can't afford that, which actually people didn't say to me too often, probably not as often as they should have, but I think they misguidedly thought I had a plan for everything. Even though I was sometimes just blundering into scenes, just like, oh, I'll figure this out. And then it's like, whoop, I guess I didn't. But then I guess, we made it work. But like, it is one of those things where no one was really saying we couldn't do this, but like Kareem occasionally would be like, this is going to be tough. And then I could just rewrite the scene, So there's that, so, there was definitely like Seance became a little bit downscaled on its way to a shooting draft, just because I realized some of the set pieces I'd written in there were too elaborate. Some of them would take us an entire day to shoot, and we didn't ever have that. But the good news is by starting huge, my ambitions for Seance were so huge and ridiculous that I think by downscaling them to just like a place of like filmmaking reality, they still stayed pretty ridiculous, like more than like most people I think would have attempted. I think I know Adam was kind of like, whoa. Like how much time, like how many takes did you do that? I was like, one take is what we had of that. and that's in the movie. And if I show one more frame, it doesn't work. But that's filmmaking. I mean, that's Jaws. There was a time when Adam and I had a project in the works with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. And one of the first questions I asked when it was a little more comfortable that I felt like I could ask Peter Jackson, who's like one of my heroes, like a question. I was like, does it ever feel like you have enough money on a film? Because that was what I wanted to know at that time, because we just finished Your Next and he had these $300 million budgets. So I was like, does it ever feel enough, or do you always feel like you have about 20% less than the bare minimum of what you need to get it done? And he was like, oh yeah, it's that. Yeah, it's always that. It's like if you have 300 million, you need 360 to do it, to do the bare minimum of what you require. You need, no matter what. And so that's it. I think whether you're Spielberg or Christopher Nolan or Claire Denis or Shinya Tsukamoto, you're probably always out there just being like, fuck, if I just had like 20% more, I could really make this fucking work. And, so maybe me on Seance, I think that is just the way filmmaking is, whether it's low budget or big budget. And so I think viewers hopefully, will watch Seance and have no concept of how miserable I was making it.
Well, and I'm telling you guys now, anyone watching, see this movie. It's really fantastic, dude. I'm so glad you joined us. We've gone over the half hour, but it's always a pleasure. And I'll tell you right now, to your face, it's because you're a fucking talented filmmaker. You're a talented writer. You're a talented director, and I can't fucking wait to see what's next from you, man.
I really appreciate that. I mean, I just hope it's something. So yeah, but well, look, at the very least, Adam Wingard and I have some cool projects in the works. So we're not going to let people down with all of those. And then I'll try to get one of my own weird things going as well.
Well, so. You should come back on anytime. We'd love to have you back.
I'm here.
Awesome, man. Cheers.
Okay. All right.
Bye,
cheers. Buddy. Have a good one.